Well, hello and welcome to the Spandex and Wine Podcast, Kim. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I've been really looking forward to this. I mean, it's not every day you get to talk to the Vagina Coach.
Well, I've been looking forward to it too. I welcome any opportunity to help get this information out to more people.
Yes, I started your course today. You had a special on Instagram over the weekend, and I went ahead and signed up for it. So I got halfway through today, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is good stuff. This is
Oh,
amazing.
good. Thank you. Thank you for signing up. And yeah, I mean, I think I put together something pretty comprehensive, and a lot of people are pretty blown away when they come in and they realize how much they don't know about their body, and we've just never been taught this information before. So yeah, so I hope it serves you well.
Yes, yeah, already. And I'm a personal trainer as well. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. We didn't get this kind of training when I was going through my certification. So it's
Which is
really
kind of
helpful.
crazy when you think about it's a group of muscles. And as personal trainers, we learn all the other muscles in the body and their functions and their origin and insertion and all the different exercises. And there's this critical part of the body called the pelvic floor that has been totally left out. And I think that's a real disservice to what we're trying to do to help people with fitness and optimizing movement, because the pelvic floor is the part of the core, and that's a big part of how we transfer loads and how we optimize movement and our core stability, all that kind of stuff. So I'm fighting also really hard to make sure that that gets into fitness curriculums as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I totally agree. And as I was going through, I'm like, I think of things for myself, but then also clients. I'm like, oh, I wonder if this is, and because of this, and this is because of that.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh shoot, I'm doing my clients a disservice. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. But it's like we're I mean, I know it now and you're learning it, but we know what we know, and we teach with the tools that we have currently. And now your mind is going to be expanded, and it's not your fault that you didn't know this before, but now you're going to know it, and now you'll be able to help people in a different way.
Yes, yes, that's true. I want to know how you got started with all of this.
It, I mean, you can really look back, and it started in sixth grade when I saw a childbirth video, and I thought, no, thank you. Um, but I went home and I looked at my mom a little differently, and I said, well, she did it, and my aunts did it, and my grandma did it, and so it's sort of planted this fear and fascination in me. And I asked my mom questions about her births, and she told me that she had episiotomies, which is where they cut part of the perineum in,
Mhm.
and that used to be standard of care. And thankfully that's not anymore. But that was just another seed planted to say, no, no, thank you. And so I sort of grew up thinking, never having kids.
Yeah.
And then when I married my now husband, and we had an opportunity to witness the birth of our niece. And that was a bit of a TSN turning point where I saw birth differently than what I had seen portrayed in that childbirth video and in media and movies and all the things that we see. And
Mhm.
so it really inspired me and changed my mind. And the next year I was pregnant. And so then I was determined to do everything I could to have a different story than my mom. I'd heard about perineal massage, and my midwives had also told me about a biofeedback device called the Epino. And Epino stands for no episiotomy. And this was a device manufactured in Germany. And I researched it and decided it made a whole heck of a lot of sense when we looked at it from a fitness perspective, with stretching and strengthening in preparation for a physical event, with birth being that physical event. And so I purchased one. I had a great experience, didn't have any tearing. And then I thought, well, why doesn't everybody use one of these? So I contacted the company and said, could I be a distributor? And my intention wasn't for it to be a business per se. I just thought I would do it as a side thing. And it's now 20 years later, so the side thing became a big thing and
Oh my
sort of
gosh.
evolved along the way. But that's where it started. I worked initially primarily with pregnant women. And then I saw that postpartum recovery was something that we overlook in North America, and formed a second business with two other women called Bellies Inc. And we manufactured a postpartum wrap, trying to bring in some of the traditional practices of mother warming or mother roasting, where there is wrapping and restorative exercise and heat and nourishment from food and rest
Mm.
like principles of recovery, basically, that we also see in fitness. There's always that periodization that we go through, with recovery being a big element. So juggled the two of them. And then I started to go through my own perimenopause, kind of menopause transition, and was another seed planted to say, this isn't just do your Kegels in pregnancy, or here's how you can recover more optimally. We have this whole life cycle that we go through as people, as women, and we menstruate. Many of us give birth. All of us who reach midlife will go through menopause, and our pelvic floor is a part of that whole journey. And so that sort of opened up this new conversation, or expanded conversation, I guess I will say, with regards to pelvic health in menopause. And now that's the majority of the population that I serve, is sort of that, 45 to 65-ish. Mind you, I do have a few women in their 70s, 80s, and 90s as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I love the playfulness that you have with it too. Like you have the buff muff method, and I think it said getting you to think inside the box and things like that. Just kind of a little playful too, to have fun with it. So that's really cool. I like that. And I think you're right. I think we're learning more and more now, and it's more commonly talked about. Like I mean, I had no idea until a few years ago that there were pelvic floor physical therapists. I had no idea until one showed up in my yoga class, and we got to talking, and I thought that was fascinating. And one of the things that she said, like the worst thing that you can do, or one of the worst things, is squatting and hovering over a toilet while you're peeing. I'm like, oh, okay, I do that all the time.
Yeah, most people do.
Yeah. I thought I was
Yeah.
strengthening my quads.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't know about pelvic floor physical therapists until it was about 2 or 3 years after the birth of my second child. So I had started this, side business, and I now had a website, and I started to get pelvic floor physiotherapists. Physiotherapy and physical therapy meaning the same thing. It's the same profession, but different terminology versus Canada and the States and parts of Europe. But so I had started having them refer to me, and I thought, what the heck's a pelvic floor physiotherapist? And then once I learned what they do, I thought, oh my gosh, just like I started screaming from the rooftops about the Epino, I started screaming from the rooftops about pelvic floor PT, because it's this unknown resource that we have that I think could really change the trajectory of women's health, and could save marriages, could save, uh, so much silent suffering that people go through, social engagements, the restrictions that people sometimes place on themselves or have placed on them if they're diagnosed with incontinence and prolapse and told they can't jump, or they can't run, or they can't lift heavy. It just, it it does not serve women, the current pelvic floor education that we have, which is go home and do your Kegels, or stop exercising if you have a prolapse. We can do better
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Eh, Some of the think about when you were going through the video, or I was going through your videos, was like your posture, and your pelvic tilting, and how that makes a difference, and how that can affect your pelvic floor. It's just all so fascinating to me. And how old are your kids now?
My oldest is 20 and my youngest is
Okay.
17. He'll be 18 in January. So he's getting I kind of, when I say those numbers, I think, holy Hannah, 20 and 18. That means
I
I'm a
know.
lot older than I used to be too.
Yeah, no, I don't feel old until I say my kids' age, and then I'm like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
But so when you were having your kids, did you, okay, I know you said that you researched that gadget you said from Germany,
The Epino, yeah.
and then okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said it was called the Epino. Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. But were there any therapists that you knew of at that time? Because I feel like now I'm hearing young girls after they have their, I say young girls, they're young to me, they're 30, but that they're going through therapy, and that's part of the process now, which is fascinating.
Yeah, like I said, I did not know about these therapists. I used midwives, which, at the time I thought was
Okay.
very witchcraft, woo woo, not many people were doing. And, it was very, uh, it wasn't the standard, it wasn't normal. And I do believe that's who we should be using from a birth perspective if you want some support. But no, I didn't know about pelvic floor PT until several years after the birth of my second, sorry. And then once I found out, then it was wanting wanting to understand why this was not standard of care. In parts of Europe, it is standard of care. Everybody who gives birth is offered 6 to 12 visits subsidized by the government to pelvic floor physical therapy. And while it's not a 100% perfect system, it's more perfect than what we have here, where nobody even knows about it. And it is, if you have coverage for physical therapy or physiotherapy, it great from an insurance perspective, then we have access to this, but not everybody's insurance provider covers it. Still, again, some people don't know about it. So it's something that I believe we would all benefit from seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist once a year, even if we have no symptoms, but especially if we do. And I think that this care would ideally could start in our early teens or when we become sexually active. And just like we see the dentist once or twice a year for a checkup, we've been going for our whole life. Even if we have no toothache or any signs of cavity, we just go because we've been told to, and we brush and floss, and then we go see the dentist. And so if we took that same philosophy and we saw our pelvic PT once a year for a checkup, and we had a consistent pelvic floor exercise maintenance program that we did, even if we have no symptoms, but trying to keep those symptoms at bay so we don't get quote unquote cavities or
Yeah.
gum recession, right? If I'm equating the two. So I always equate it to oral health. We, from a very young age, had a seed planted that we need to brush, we need to floss, and we need to see a dentist once or twice a
Yeah.
year for a checkup. And we just go. And we should do the same thing with our pelvic floor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you went through some things in the videos about like what you're doing to yourself that's kind of harming. And one of the things you said was going to the bathroom when you're not ready to go to the bathroom. Like if you're getting ready to go out somewhere and you're like, oh, I better go just in case. I didn't even think about that. Like waiting until your bladder's full. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like Pavlov's dog. There we can condition our bladder to respond to cues, to signal us when it's not actually full. So if we are constantly voiding before the bladder is actually full, before it sends us the message that it's time to go, it will start to say, oh, you would like to be notified at, say, a half a cup of liquid as opposed to, or urine, as opposed to typical kind of around a cup and a half, which would be considered a full bladder from a voiding perspective. It can hold more than that, but that's usually when it's time to go to the bathroom. So if we're
Mhm.
constantly pee before every exercise class, pee before we leave the house, pee every time we get home, these become conditioned responses. And then it leads to inappropriate signaling of the bladder, that it will start to signal you at times when it's not actually full. And then you start to say, like people say, I feel like I have to go to the bathroom all the time. And they're going every 30 minutes, every hour. And we should be able to go 2.5 to 4 hours easily between voids. Of course, if you have bladder irritants, if you have a huge volume of liquid, you're going to have to go more. But if you're
Sure.
staying hydrated through the day and don't really have any irritants, then 2.5 to 4 hours would be considered normal. And so we don't, I had one woman today in my community say that was an aha moment for her because, and it was also the sound of running water as a trigger for her because she said her mom would, if they were leaving the house, she would say, you need to go to the bathroom. And the kids would say, like her and her siblings would say, we don't have to go. And then she would say, you have to go, just try. And then she would turn water on to try to stimulate a response from the bladder. So it's no wonder she now has this conditioned response of when she hears running water, it's her bladder is like, oh, it's time to go pee. So yeah, I mean, once in a while, we all do it and it's totally fine. Just tell yourself, in your mind. You don't have to say it out loud. Just like, this is a just in case pee. It's not normal. I know you're not full, but I'm doing this because I need to sit in traffic for 2 hours or something like that. But
Yeah.
if it's part of your everyday practice, it will create more issues for you than serving you.
And Kim, what about the opposite? I have lots of teachers or now retired teachers, and I know teachers and nurses are like the worst about an overfull bladder. So
Yep.
what damage can that do?
So that will also is inappropriate signaling. And now we have a dampened response. So if we aren't responding over time, the bladder becomes, it's a muscle, it becomes overstretched, and that signaling will also become hindered. So exactly as you said, teachers who may always have to hold and hold and hold, or my mom, she was an OR nurse. It's not like she could leave in the middle of a surgery. So nurses, shift workers, people that don't have freedom and flexibility in their schedule to respond to those voids will often stop drinking and will hold and hold and hold and hold. And so they become chronically dehydrated, which can also irritate the bladder and create more senses of urgency. And they also then become, those sensations to void become hindered. So just like we would use bladder training for somebody who's going too often, we would use bladder training for somebody who's not going enough. So that the people in the first category, we would have them try to delay that void and try to overcome any urges that they have so that they can get to that 2.5 to 4 hour zone. And the people who aren't responding, we would have to say, even if you don't have the signal, go at this time. Because so
Mm-hmm.
it sounds counterintuitive that we're telling the kind of the opposite things to do, but they are in opposite ends of the camp, and we want to try to normalize and get both of them into that 2.5 to 4 hour zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you have a quiz out there that you can take to kind of see where you're at. What are some of the items on your list that you're like, okay, you might have a problem?
Some of the things that people experience, they don't necessarily equate to pelvic floor challenges, is something like back pain. Low back pain, the majority of women with low back pain have some form of pelvic floor dysfunction. So asking
Mm.
things about back pain, asking if they've had any tearing or episiotomies with childbirth or any other types of surgery. So even if you've never given birth before, that doesn't mean that you are immune to pelvic floor dysfunction. Hysterectomies are a contributor to other types of prolapse. And some people have had a hysterectomy because of prolapse. And they think, well, they took my uterus out and they fixed everything, so I'm fine, I'm fixed. And that's not always the case. And in fact, it increases the risk of other types of prolapse and incontinence. Painful sex is another thing that we sometimes people have had painful sex for a long time, and or sometimes it just shows up, but sometimes they just think, well, I guess that's just what happens when you're getting older, and now I'm postmenopause. But that is not something that we should just accept as normal. We've sort of touched on, if you're going frequently, if you feel like you have to go to the bathroom all the time, if you feel like you're fine for the majority of the day, but a trigger happens and then all of a sudden it's an overwhelming urge and you might lose control of your bladder.
Mm-hmm.
The leaking urine, most of us know that. Oh, if I jump on a trampoline. Oh, if I can't do jumping jacks anymore. Oh, if I cough or sneeze. We generally know that's not an issue, but we are then told that that's just a part of being a woman, or that's just part of getting older. And here's these crinkly black, sort of sexy underwear that have pads built in that you can wear and everything will be fine. So we have messaging that tells us we just need to accept it. You just need to wear pads for the rest of your life. Some people are told that surgery is the only fix. Some people are told that exercise will not make any difference. Some people are never given an option of things like pessaries or vaginal estrogen or other supplements. So there's so much more to pelvic health than just Kegels, which is what most of us have been told or taught. If we've heard anything about pelvic floor, it's usually Kegels is a form of pelvic floor exercise and we should do them, and we should do hundreds a day. So those are all kind of general myths, I would say, that people have as it pertains to pelvic floor health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We had one lady in class tell us that she was going through some therapy and she was talking about Kegelen, and she was telling us, oh, I think we've all been doing it wrong. Like you should feel it all the way up. And I'm like, oh, wow, that is so interesting.
Yeah, again, not our fault. Nobody taught us. Nobody told us to.
Right.
We've been left to, maybe we've been given a pamphlet, or maybe we've heard somebody say it's the muscles you use to stop the flow of urine. So then we were like, okay, can I stop the flow of urine? And we kind of just think of this squeeze. And then sometimes people even practice on the toilet, which is another thing you definitely don't want to do. It's okay for a test to see if you can identify the muscles and can you stop the flow, but do not practice your pelvic floor exercise on the toilet. But Yeah, most people, studies even show most people do them incorrectly because do a Kegel or a pelvic floor activation relaxation cycle incorrectly because we've never been taught and nobody has
Mhm.
ever evaluated our ability to do it. And that's another reason why I think pelvic floor physical therapy is so important. They, in my opinion, are the gold standard for ensuring you are doing them correctly. Good PTs will also assess you in standing because the presentation of your anatomy and the ability and capacity of the muscles is different lying down compared to standing up. So those are important things to know as well.
Mhm. Mhm. And what about products like, and you might laugh at me and be like, "Oh my gosh, Robin," or you might be like, "Oh yeah, that's helpful." So like the weighted balls,
Mhm.
is that something that you should be
It's a
using or can
progression.
be?
It's a
Okay,
progression.
okay.
So if you think you and I are both personal trainers, we know the principles of fitness, one being progressive overload. So we can increase sets, we can increase reps, we can increase speed, tempo, we can increase frequency, can increase resistance. And the pelvic floor, again, is a group of muscles, and we can train it with very similar principles. We just want to
Hmm.
make sure that we like as a with a beginner, I wouldn't put them into the weight room and have them pick up 20 pounds and have them do, a bent over row. There would be some steps involved to prepare them for that movement. And similar
Right.
with the pelvic floor, we want to start with, first of all, this is the pelvic floor, this is how it works, this is how it coordinates with your breath. This is some imagery you can use to connect with that group of muscles that we can't see, because other ones we can see in the mirror, these ones we can't. And so once we've connected with that group of muscles, once we are able to contract, lift, and let go, once we are able to coordinate it into the pelvic floor into dynamic movement, and we've kind of increased sets, we've increased reps, we've played with those variables. Now we're ready for more. Something like Kegel weights can come in and play a really valuable role. They're also a bit of biofeedback in a way because we have something there that we can think of squeezing and holding on to. We
Yeah.
can, while it's inside, we can gently tug on the little tail or string part of it. Sidebar disclaimer, if you are putting anything in your vagina like Kegel weights or yoni eggs, I prefer things that are silicone as opposed to the eggs or the porous materials like stones. Always, always, always make sure there is something that you can use to remove it. Some
Mhm.
information is say says bear down and expel it out. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. So
Yeah.
you can use that string. The weight in and of itself is providing resistance, but you can also gently tug on it while trying to resist that. So preventing, as if you're trying to pull it out, try to use your muscles to prevent it from being pulled out. So those are a couple of ways that you can use it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And I'm glad that you mentioned breath work and breathing and how important that is. And I know a lot of times, I talk about it in yoga class all the time. And if we're working out, I'll just say, make sure you breathe. But I forget to, you go back to what you learned at the beginning. It's always having a beginner's mind is very helpful and being able to share that. So talk a little bit about the importance of breathing and breath work and with all of your exercises.
Mm-hmm. The pelvic floor is the foundation of the core, which I had mentioned earlier. The what I call the core four is the pelvic floor on the bottom, the diaphragm on the top. If you think of a canister, diaphragm on top, the multifidus, which are little muscles around our spine on the back, and our deep abdominals, the transversus abdominis on the front. So those four players, so to speak, are what form that inner core unit. When we inhale, when we take a breath in, what should happen is our ribs should expand to allow expansion of the lungs. The diaphragm moves from kind of an arched position and it sort of flattens, and that's drawing air into the body. And by allowing the ribs to expand, by allowing the belly to expand, and reciprocally the pelvic floor expands and lengthens, that allows intake of oxygen. And then as we exhale, the pelvic floor contracts and lifts, the transversus draws inwards towards the spine, and that's sort of helping expel the stale air, and the ribs recoil back to normal, and the diaphragm goes back up into its arched position. So the relationship between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor is really, really, that is the foundation for then being able to train the pelvic floor. If we don't improve the relationship between the breath and the diaphragm, or if we're not even aware of that, the exercise we do is going to be limited in its ability to serve us. So when you mentioned earlier, I was talking about posture. How we hold our body, whether we're sitting or lying down or standing up, it doesn't, well, how we hold our body facilitates that relationship. It allows the diaphragm to be in its kind of stacked position with the pelvic floor. If we're chronically sitting in a slouched position, when we're lying down on the floor, we always have our low back pressed into the floor and putting us in a posterior tilt. If we're always wearing heeled shoes or standing with a posterior tilt, the pelvic floor is going to adapt to a shorter state, and it's not going to be in its optimal position to work in synergy with the diaphragm. So our breath will become more shallow. We won't take the pelvic floor through its range of motion, and it won't be able to then respond at the right time with the right amount of force for things like laughing, coughing, sneezing, lifting, all the things that we do, or organ support. So that is well, I always actually start with water and pooping. Those are the two things we start with. Then we have to learn the posture and the breath. Then we can start to layer in the quote unquote Kegel part of it and bringing that into dynamic movement. But we need those fundamentals in place first.
Yeah. It is all just so fascinating to me. And for the person that's listening, they're going, oh my gosh, I don't know. There's so much to it. I'm just a lost cause. I can tell you that Kim's course is easy to follow, and I'll make sure that I put all the links in the show notes. And before we get to that, though, I wanted to talk about like I see that you have retreats and all kinds of fun things like that that you do. And I think I saw Kegels and cocktails. So tell us about some of the fun events that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of the reason why I also have some funny terms that I use is this is a challenging topic. It's heavy. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. It's something that hinders us in many ways from enjoying life to the fullest. And I want to instill a little bit of fun and lightheartedness to this topic. I want it to be something that's not icky. I don't want it to be a medical, like feeling like you're going to a doctor's office to learn about anatomy or something. So way back when I started my business, even though I was working primarily with pregnant women and new moms, I made an event that was for everybody to learn about pelvic floor health, which was called Kegels and Cocktails. So even though alcohol is a bladder irritant, but it's, it was a catchy name, so we did it. But it was meant to be a girls' night out where we have some speakers come and educate you in a way that doesn't feel clinical. We're in a cool place. We can choose to have a cocktail, whether it's a mocktail or an alcoholic beverage or just some water, whatever. But we just mingle and realize we're not alone in this journey and empower ourselves with knowledge and information. I always have a pelvic floor physical therapist as one of the speakers, again, because I believe that's such a valuable resource. And we did a few virtually during COVID, and now we do a few of those virtual as well. But generally, I really like to do the in-person live ones because I don't feel like we get enough live stuff anymore. And that was also another impetus for the retreat was coming, and the events are fun. You learn a lot. And we only have 3 hours, so we can't really do a lot. You kind of consume all this information, then you have to go and apply it. The retreats are more of an immersive experience where I co-facilitate with my teaching partner, Dr. Bree Grogan, who is a pelvic floor PT. And we're both very aligned in our principles, but we have very different ways of approaching how we teach. And so it gives a really rich opportunity for people to learn from both of us in a really safe place with an amazing group of, again, women who are coming who also have pelvic floor challenges. And we take everything away for you to just be able to focus on your body. You're fed with beautiful food. We're surrounded by nature. We provide opportunities for movement and connection, but also free time so you can assimilate and integrate what you're learning. And people walk away feeling like they have a fresh start or like they have now they have the tools to be able to move forward on their own. And it really is a transformational experience for both Bree and I, as well as the participants.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I saw the video on your website and it just looks amazing. It's like it'd be a really cool retreat to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a podcast also.
I have a podcast. I started a podcast about, I kind of always wanted to start one, but I'm sure, as you know, when you run your own business and you have so many balls in the air, I just couldn't add another thing to my plate at that time. So
Yeah.
I said, when I've built my business to a level where I can afford to have somebody who can produce my podcast, like do all the editing
Yeah.
for me, I said, okay, then I'll do it. So I got to that level, and thankfully I'm able to pay somebody to do that. So I get to do the fun part, which is talking to amazing people, and then they can handle the rest of the stuff
Yeah.
that is not my zone of genius. My podcast is called Between Two Lips, and again, another play on words, if you know, between two ferns. And um, but yeah, I love it. I love, like we're doing right now. We're having this really cool conversation that will land in the ears of somebody who may not even know they need this information, and it'll spark a fire in them that they can go and take action, or at least know that there are opportunities. And to that point where you said some people might be listening going, oh my God, I didn't know there were so many things. I thought I could just do some Kegels and I'd be fine.
Yeah.
Yes, it can feel like a big list, but you can look at that as there's so much opportunity. It's not just another thing on your to-do list. It will feel like that at the beginning, but really
Hmm.
we have so many opportunities to change the symptoms that we have, the beliefs that we have, and all of that will then trickle into all the other things we do in our life. If we're distracted constantly by our pelvic floor, it's going to inhibit our exercise, our work, our relationships, our emotional health. Like it gets in there, and we want to free that up so that we can, without distraction, work, play, be with our grandchildren, just not
Hmm.
be distracted constantly or worrying constantly about our pelvic floor.
Hmm. Hmm. And it makes me wonder about so many things personally. I mean, just movements that aren't as easy as they used to be. I was going through your list and I'm like, oh no, 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 no. Oh, well, yeah, my hips do hurt or this. And I had a massage, we had a massage therapist that used to be at the studio with me. And he moved down to the Phoenix area. And so we all went to go visit him. And during one of my massages, he's like, you need to work on your pelvic floor. And he was like, I don't even remember. It's like my elbow or something that he was working on. I'm like, my elbow, but I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you know that?
Yeah, it's all
It was
connected.
fascinating that he could see that and he could feel that.
Yeah, we can have compensations in our feet. We could have, knee pain, ankle pain can often be tied back up to the pelvic floor. Shoulder pain, jaw tension, sleep apnea is related to a lot of waking to pee. Like there's so many things that are interconnected. And it's never ever too late to intervene. My oldest member is 93. And I love that she didn't just accept that, well, I'm 93, whenever, I'm going to die soon, and not bother. She came in and she's doing the work, and and noticing the change. And I just think that is so awesome. So
Yes.
we have we have choice. We can choose to accept where we are and just kind of like, well, I guess that's just the way that it is, or we can choose to do something to make a change. And I can tell you that everybody who makes that commitment, 10 to 15 minutes a day, their lives change. They literally change, and it's remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So besides signing up for your course, what's one simple thing that people can start with today?
Drink more water. Um, a lot of people are chronically dehydrated in general, and especially women with pelvic floor dysfunction. And when you are afraid of leaking, when you are afraid that you might have an urge, when you feel like you maybe aren't going to be close to a bathroom, you're going to stop drinking because you think that if I don't have any liquid in me, I won't need to pee or I won't leak.
Hmm.
But the bladder is filling not just with the water we drink, but other waste products. And it's constantly filling. And if we don't have enough water, we aren't hydrated, the urine will become a lot more concentrated and it will irritate the bladder. And the other thing that happens is we don't poop well if we aren't hydrated. And if we are constipated, constipation is one of the biggest contributors to bladder urgency, bladder frequency, and pelvic organ prolapse. So just the simple thing of aiming to get 2 to 3 liters of water spread out over your day can, again, remarkably change people's symptoms.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask if you had a magic number, so thanks for saying that. How can everyone find you?
If you go to Google and put Vagina Coach in, you'll find me somewhere. My website is vaginacoach.com, and my social handles are all Vagina Coach, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest. I don't really go so much to X, formerly known as Twitter, anymore. That's where I started. That was our first platform.
Oh,
But I don't really do much there at all anymore. Facebook as well.
okay. Very good. And I'll put all of that in the show notes as well. So I wanted to say thank you so much for being here. This is a special episode because it is my 100th episode. So thank you for being that
Congratulations.
person for me.
Oh, that's amazing. That is a huge milestone. And again, thank you so much for having me here and helping spread awareness about this topic. And huge congratulations to you, because that I know how much work goes into making a podcast happen.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.